my water just broke. I felt like things really intensified.
She was right there and she was coming.
It was an amazing feeling.
I'm going to cry just thinking about it. I could feel her head.
We heard her cry. We were squeezing hands and she was screaming.
I'm Bryn Hunt Palmer, and you're listening to The Birth Hour. This podcast is designed as a safe place to come together and share childbirth stories. Stick around and join us to hear informative and empowering birth journeys from all over the world. Today's episode is sponsored by Expectful, the #1 guided meditation and sleep app for your fertility, pregnancy, and motherhood journey. Just like you probably take a prenatal vitamin for your body, Expectful's meditations are like a prenatal vitamin for your mind and can help you have a happier, healthier journey to motherhood. Whether you are trying to conceive, pregnant, or postpartum, everything in the Expectful app was made just for this special moment in your life and created based on interviews with hopeful, expecting, and new parents just like you. Ready to reduce stress, improve sleep, and connect with your little one? Go to expectful.com/birthhour or download the Expectful app in the App Store to get started with a free trial. Expectful.com/birthhour will get you an extended 14-day free trial today. Again, that's expectful.com/birthhour. At the end of today's episode, I'll be talking to Anissa from Expectful, and we'll be doing a special focus on all of their sleep meditations and other sleep offerings, including sleep stories, a sleep sound machine, and more. So stay tuned for that conversation at the end of this episode. Today's guest is Camilla, and she's going to be sharing 3 different birth stories, 1 hospital birth and 2 home births. The second home birth was right before the shutdown of COVID, so she'll be talking about how her postpartum was affected by that as well. Hi, Camilla. Welcome to the Birth Hour. Thanks for coming on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Can you start by telling listeners a little bit about you and your family?
Sure. We live in the Bay Area. My husband and I have been together for about 15 years, married for 10 years, and we have 3 kiddos, Benjamin 6, Cecilia 3, and then a brand new 1-year-old, Oliver. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I just recently stopped working, but I worked in schools teaching social emotional learning and also sex ed, which was one of my favorite things to do. I have a passion for childbirth and studied a lot of traumatic birth stuff and transitioned into becoming a parent in postgraduate studies. And then once I started having kids, got more passionate about it.
All right. Well, I know we're going to try to fit in all 3 stories today. So let's go back a few years and start with your pregnancy with your first.
Sure. Well, I knew when I wanted to get pregnant, I wanted to know everything about getting pregnant. So I read the book, The Taking Charge of Your Fertility.
Yes. I wish I had read that when I was like 13. I probably would have not been interested, but so many things I did not know.
Right. And that was like right prior to me teaching sex ed as well. So It was like, I was so excited. I worked with all girls and 8th grade girls. And so it was like my favorite gift to give to them, this idea of understanding your body and how it works.
Yeah.
So anyway, I started charting and was like taping my temperature and knowing everything. And after we started trying to get pregnant, I was wondering why we weren't getting pregnant, because I was like, we're doing it exactly when we need to be doing it. And so I fibbed a little bit after 6 months to our doctor and said, we've been trying for a little while longer to see if they would start fertility testing. And it seemed like things were looking okay with me. We had just started, but the results of my husband's sperm test came back and they said, although he had a lot, they were all kind of swimming in the wrong direction. And so they thought it would probably be difficult for us to get pregnant on our own. But shockingly, as we were like kind of going through the process and we were about to meet with our urologist, I found out I was pregnant. So I don't know how that all worked out, but that pregnancy stuck. And so we didn't really have to do anything more with that. But we were mindful of that as we moved forward in thinking about getting pregnant later. But so my first pregnancy was pretty dreamy. I napped and went to yoga and had a great time and loved it. I was one of those annoying pregnant people that just enjoyed pregnancy so much and was excited about childbirth. My mom had 4 unmedicated births, so I was excited about trying that out, but was open to whatever happened. I had planned for an unmedicated birth at the hospital with a midwife and a doula. I didn't know anything about home birth at the time, so I just was planning that. We lived in the city, so San Francisco, and in October was when my son was born, and that is when we have Fleet Week. So literally, like I went up to a roof deck. I was about 39 weeks pregnant, and the Blue Angels started flying over San Francisco, and I started having contractions. And they were about 2 minutes apart from the beginning. So I was really confused, and I didn't understand exactly what was happening. But we Irish goodbyed that party, and we walked home, and it was like the longest. It was about a 2-block walk, but it was the longest walk. I just like could not catch my breath. We called our doula and I asked her to come over, and she got there, and we were there for about an hour, and I had said everything felt really tight, and she asked if I felt pushy, and I said yes, but in retrospect, that wasn't exactly how I was feeling, but I just didn't really know. And when we checked in at the hospital, I was about 4 centimeters dilated, and they were like, you can go home. And I said, no, I'm not going to go back in the car. I'm still having contractions every 2 minutes. Like, I didn't want to go home. And I think that was maybe 5 or 6 p.m. And then we got checked in, and I went up to my room, and I thought I would see how things were going and if I was going to get any pain medication. But I decided I would see for another hour, and they checked me, and it was 6 centimeters. And about another hour later, I said that like things felt different, and I felt like I needed to push. And the nurse told me no, that I was not at that point yet. And I like begged her to check me again. And sure enough, I was complete, and baby was coming. So I didn't realize it, but my husband said like the room like started to go a little crazy. So they like didn't have a doctor yet for me. My midwife that I had wasn't on call, and they didn't have another midwife in the practice. So I started pushing. They again asked me if I would stop, and I think I just kept pushing. And a few minutes after the doctor arrived, baby came. I think I pushed for probably about like a half an hour. But yeah, it was all in all, his labor was about 6 hours. So not at all what I had expected for a first birth. Like everything, when we'd taken the childbirth classes, everybody had said like it's going to start 15 minutes apart and then like move down. But yeah, it was pretty wild and really intense. And postpartum and everything was not exactly what I had expected. I had planned, probably as most first-time moms do, like planned so much for the birth and forgot completely about the after effects and like what was going to happen next. And I was able to get up and move pretty quickly, and I took that as a sign that I could go for walks and do everything I wanted to do, but that kind of slowed down my whole healing process. So I felt like it was a good 6 to 12 weeks before I felt like normal again. Fortunately, Benjamin was like a pretty easygoing baby, and he helped our transition into parenthood really well. And he slept, which I think made a big difference for us. And we learned very quickly after our second was born how much of a difference that could make. So that was kind of our first introduction into the world of parenting.
Okay, so then after such a quick birth, did it change your plans at all when you were planning for a second?
Yeah, good question. Not exactly at first. We moved out of the city, and I was still planning to have a hospital birth, but I was getting more and more nervous about was I going to be able to get to the hospital in time, because everything I read was like second babies come faster. And I was like, how can a baby come faster? But I was then started listening to your podcast and was learning more and more about all of these crazy different types of births. Probably after about 20 weeks, found out we were having a girl. Everything was looking really good, and I was feeling great about the pregnancy. I was like, maybe I could do this at home. But I loved my new provider. I had a midwife, and I was excited about working with her, but it was very unlikely that I would actually get her at the hospital. So around 28 weeks, we did a hospital tour, and like all of the feelings of like anxiety that I had had at the hospital started to come back from my first birth. And so I just wasn't feeling great about it. And I talked to my husband and said, like, what do you think about doing a home birth? Nobody in our friend group or anybody we'd known had done any sort of home births. My older sister had kids, had done epidural births, and I had some idea of like what it meant to do a home birth. And my husband, which I so appreciate and remember so much him saying, was like, you don't have to be all of one thing. You can do this and be this. And so we started interviewing midwives, and I'm so glad because it was the best decision we could have made. We found a midwife we really liked and we dived right in. So at 30 weeks, I was no longer going to be giving birth at a hospital if everything went fine. And we decided to do a home birth.
All right. I'm excited to hear how it went for you.
Yeah. So my midwife had said similarly, once I start contractions, like call her because second babies do usually come quicker than the first. But this time it was funny. So I've been fortunate. All of my babies came a little bit early. My son was 39 and 5. And then at 39 and 4, I was like putting away some dishes and I suddenly felt like some leaking. And I like thought like maybe I had just peed myself and went to the bathroom. It's like still coming. And I don't know why I didn't think like, oh, my water had broken. But with my first, they didn't really know when my water had broken and it broke sometime at the hospital. I was in the shower or something. And so I didn't know what that was like. And the great thing about having a home birth, my midwife was like, well, I'll just come over and check. And she like tested a pad and was like, yep, nope, that's amniotic fluid. And so like an hour later, the contractions came like every 10 minutes. And I got these like incredible breaks between contractions. And it was so nice, not at all what I had experienced the first time around. And what was also extra special is my son was there with me. So he got to kind of be a part of the whole labor experience and hung out while I was on the labor ball and just kind of got to be a part of it. But I think it was probably similar between 2 and 3 p.m. when things started. And my midwife had said, you know, I think baby will come once your son goes to sleep. And sure enough, my husband put him down around 7:30. And shortly after 9 o'clock, she came. So this time I had done a water birth and I was really excited to see what it was like to get into the water. And I'll never forget, I got into the water and I was like, oh my God, this is what an epidural is. Because all my contractions stopped. And I was a little worried actually that I was going to be in labor forever at that point because I just like sat there and it was very relaxed. But sure enough, about like 10, 15 minutes later, they picked back up again. Things got intense pretty quickly. But yes, I was excited to push with my first because I felt like I finally got to like have some momentum against those intense contractions. With my second, I was like, I think you just know what's going to happen. And
not ready for this.
And like maybe like in retrospect, it's like she changed our world so much. So I was like not quite ready for the force that she was. So I started pushing and it was about the same, like probably like a half hour and out she came. I think she had the cord wrapped around her neck, but my midwife just quickly took it off and in my arm she was. And then she screamed and she screamed really loud for a good hour and she still screams that loud. But I had kind of thought that given how peaceful her birth was, like we were always going to have, like people have talked about how home births, like baby just stares at you and I'd seen all these pictures and no, she was a force. So, but still her personality. Postpartum with her, I felt like recovery-wise was pretty good. I was a little bit more careful about like staying in bed. My midwife asked me to not go down the stairs and take care of myself a little bit more. But she was so different than my son. My son, who's like still to this day is quite amenable to things. She just had her own agenda, and I love her for it now. But it was just such a different experience. And you know, as a therapist, I really kind of started to feel like not my normal self anymore, but was talking myself through it all the time and thought I could like therapize myself, even though I had a therapist at the time who was really kind of challenging what I was feeling. And I just was thinking I wasn't getting enough sleep. And, you know, I fought through it. And, you know, I wish I had been more open to the idea of maybe getting meds or getting some more support, but I just thought I could do it all. And I wish I would have taken better care of myself. I just powered through. And later, and as I transitioned into 3, I had a very different conversation with myself because I came out of it after a year, but it was a good year of feeling like not exactly like myself. And she started sleeping at about a year. So that also helped.
Yeah, that's good to have that perspective too, especially I know it changes with your third because of COVID, but going into your third, having that perspective was probably helpful too.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Well, let's hear that journey now.
So, as I mentioned in the beginning, kind of about the sperm that liked to swim backwards.
Yeah.
My husband and I never really thought we would have an accidental pregnancy. Mm-hmm. I come from 4, so I was open to the idea. He was still reeling from our daughter's first year, and she must have been about 2 when we conceived, but we weren't quite ready. And as I also mentioned, since I teach sex ed, I should know that the pull-out method is not foolproof. But at that point, for 13 years, it had been.
Yeah.
But my husband was traveling all the time, and sure, I don't know. It was like such a crazy thing. I mean, in some ways, it was such a blessing because then we didn't have to have the fight if we were going to have a third or not. Like, this little guy just decided to come. But yeah, so we found out we were pregnant. I guess one thing that was significant to the story as well. So we found out we were pregnant, and my father-in-law had also found out that his cancer had come back around the same week. And oddly enough, my son's due date was his birthday. So his due date was March 3rd. And so it was kind of a big emotional time. And that year was also, so 2019 was like a hard year. We ended up losing my husband's dad over Christmas. And my husband had been traveling a bunch for work and visiting his dad. And I was navigating being pregnant and unsure how we were going to navigate a new baby while we were still trying to figure out how to deal with a 4 and 2-year-old. So it was exhausting. And for the first time, like, I thought being pregnant was the easiest, breeziest thing. And it was not feeling that way. Like, I started having contractions at 30 weeks and I had like some intense back pain. Fortunately, like, everything was fine. And my midwife planned for a home birth this time. But I was like really conscious of this idea of needing like community and circle and people around me. And for this, wasn't planning a sprinkle or anything, but had kind of like a blessing way where like a few of my mom friends came together and like basically spent the whole time talking about like how to support myself through, you know, this new transition and how I was going to navigate it with this new baby. Yeah. Anyway, as you mentioned, like, things all changed a lot because he was born on the 27th and then our world shut down a few weeks later. So, but also through it was like not sure how the labor was going to be because my midwife kept saying like third babies are wild cards. And sure enough, he was. So I had started contractions in the afternoon with my other 2. And this one, I woke up in the morning with contractions, but I had one. And then it was like 30 minutes later, I had another. And then like 45 minutes later, I had another. And so I wasn't quite sure what was happening, but I knew something was happening. So my husband stayed home from work, and I also, third time mom this time, I was like, I had a massage scheduled that day and I really wanted it. And I'm so glad now that I took it. So I did go and have my massage. And I had like one contraction during the massage, but like it was actually pretty easy breezy. My husband went to Costco while the kids were at school and like got like all of this food, which I thought was kind of ridiculous at the time, but was also super happy about later. So it was just like 45 minutes, then like an hour apart, then 45 minutes. And then at like 3:00, so similar as my other 2, like my water started leaking again. Oh, and I don't know if I mentioned this in Cecilia's birth, but my midwife had recommended that I get Depends. And that was like the best advice.
I didn't learn that until my third.
So my second, I had Depends, and that was so easy to walk around while my water was still leaking. And so had it the third time, popped those things on. But I had thought, okay, now my water broke, so baby's going to come, because my second birth was also just like 6 hours from start to finish. But like this was, you know, looking back, was like actually kind of my easiest labor, in the sense that it was like I would just have a contraction and then I'd go on with my day. So my husband and I took a walk, really hard when my midwife came after my water broke and I was expecting things to happen. And then she decided she was going to leave again because that had never happened before. But she said the same thing as she said with my second, like, listen, I think when the kids go to sleep and like the house settles down, my parents had come and like there was a lot of rambunctiousness happening around. She's like, I just think you need some quiet. So sure enough, I laid in bed with my daughter. It was like 7:30 and she like started the heavy breathing of sleeping. And I got this like huge, intense contraction, but I was quiet about it because I just, given how the whole day had been on and off contractions, I just was not sure. So I went downstairs and ate some cereal, and we ended up watching that Seth Meyers stand-up where he talks about how his wife gave birth on her own, like in their apartment lobby. And I was like quietly having contractions in the kitchen. And my husband came over like after watching that. And he's like, I really don't want to have an unassisted birth. So like, maybe we should call the midwife. And I was like, it's fine. And I went upstairs and got in the shower. And while I was in the shower, I started to have some intense contractions. And so he's like, I'm calling the midwife. And I'm glad he did because she came around 9 p.m. and things got really intense. And same thing, things started getting intense. And I was feeling like I was ready to push and I really didn't want to push. But it was around 10 and out he came. This time, though, he was like, it's like the bandolier or something. He had like the cord wrapped around lots of different times. So like my husband had wanted to catch the baby, but my midwife got him and untangled him. And then up he came. We actually didn't know if we were having a boy or a girl. So that was a fun surprise. My husband was certain we were having a little girl, but it was a boy. And I didn't mention this before, but this time I did struggle to deliver my placenta. So while Oliver was on my chest, I thought like I felt like something pass, but it was like this giant blood clot. And I ended up losing a decent amount of blood. And I didn't know it at the time, but my midwife had asked if it was okay to give me Pitocin. And I thought like she just wanted to get the placenta coming, and she hadn't given it to me during my second birth. And so I was wondering, but I wasn't quite sure. And there was a lot of watching me. But the next morning, she had said that I definitely had hemorrhaged a decent amount, but was doing great. She said some people maybe would lose that blood and pass out, but I was okay. Fortunately, I ended up getting the placenta out by getting on that birthing stool, and that helped. So postpartum was a little bit slower because of recovering from losing all the blood. I stayed laid up for about 4 days and only just felt it in the sense of just feeling so exhausted. I don't know, it was third baby. I have 2 other kids running around, but everybody took care of everything else. I was, at this point had learned a lot about birth and was really big in this idea of like taking care of myself and making sure I was nourished, had good foods. And, even though I was a lot weaker from the blood loss, like my physical healing, I think from staying laid up for a while was really a lot quicker. But as I mentioned, I had like planned for all of this help that I've never gotten the first 2 times. Like I was like, maybe we'll even get somebody to help us at night, or we'll like have a babysitter and we'll do all these things. And my kids, I had a plan to extend them in school. So just as those things were starting to progress, so when Oliver was about 2 weeks old, we found out like school was going to shut down. So we live in the Bay Area, and we kind of had shut down a lot earlier than most of the country did. And I had like been kind of crazy about them coming home and germs. And I actually wasn't paying so much attention to COVID because I was in my own brand new baby world. So I was like, okay, they'll be out of school for 2 weeks. That's nice. Like we won't have to deal with a lot of germs. But then as it happened for everybody else, and as other people have mentioned, like things just slowly started to disappear even more. And like this is the time of the year it was happening last year. Yeah. And it has been crazy to think about. It was just like, first, like my midwife came for my 2-week checkup, but then she showed up for my 4-week checkup, but stood in the doorway with a mask, like a N95 mask on, and like didn't come in or didn't touch us or do anything. And then at that time, like everybody was transitioning from like having a hospital birth to wanting a home birth. And so she got like overrun with busyness. And like, I don't know, like nobody knew if it was safe for her to come anymore. And so like, we didn't have a 6-week appointment. I was supposed to have a postpartum doula who ended up virtually being my saving grace. But like, she came one time for like 2 hours in that first 2 weeks, and then no longer. She kind of fell off the radar as well in physical form, but then we set up like weekly calls. And honestly, it's in some ways what got me through, because even though she wasn't there in person, she was able to kind of at least just be, I just felt like in those first few weeks, like when fortunately my husband was home, but like everybody was all around and it wasn't at all what I expected. It was just nice to have a standard check-in.
Yeah.
And she would just walk me through like, okay, yes, this is, even though it was my third baby, but it's like everything felt so different. And I just didn't feel like I knew what was going on anymore. And like, basically he was just worn in that like solly wrap all the time while I like walked around the neighborhood with my other two, because it was like all we could do at the time. Like parks were still closed.
Yeah.
And it was just like, it was crazy. So fortunately, I don't know. I would have thought that given how everything had disappeared, like my community, my friends, like nobody, I had a few friends that still dropped off some food, which was really nice, but we weren't really seeing anyone. And my parents had pre-existing conditions. They live about an hour away from us. They've only seen them a handful of times. And probably when Oliver was about 5 months old, when they started to feel like, okay, we can wear a mask and we can see you outside.
Yeah.
So it just, I don't know. It was like such a shock. I don't know what life is like with 3 kids in a normal world.
It's hard. I can tell you that. But yeah, my husband and I talked about it when we were all stuck at home, right? You know, when COVID hit, and we're like, I think having just like a newborn, like one newborn right now would be the best. But having older kids and not being able to take them anywhere or get them out of the house is so hard.
Yeah, like when my second one was born, my older one was in daycare still. He was like in full-time daycare for the first 12 weeks. It was glorious. Like I felt like I just had a newborn.
Yeah.
So Oliver, he pretty much just slept upright for 4 months. He had reflex stuff anyway, so it was kind of hard for him to be laying down. So when my husband went back to work, he was like just having Zoom calls while he was wearing a baby.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah, it's been a crazy transition, but I fortunately have been like, I thought I would struggle a lot more, but I don't know if it was like having my husband home and having that extra support. He's like typically was traveling a lot. So it was nice to have him around.
Yeah.
I think now we're like ready for life to get a little bit back to normal, but we found a way to navigate it, and like all being together was nice. And Oliver has been a little bit better of a sleeper, so that also helps.
Yeah, that sleep is everything.
It really is. I didn't know it. I had no idea what sleep deprivation was until my daughter came.
Yeah, does not make anything easier. I'll just say that much. All right. Well, do you have any resources that you wanted to share?
Sure. 2 things. Between my second and my third, I transitioned out of work and I was learning more about doula stuff, and I took an intro to midwifery course, and she has a great book that's called Heart and Hands, A Midwife Guide to Pregnancy and Birth. And like, if you're a birth junkie, it's such a great book because it's written for midwives, but it's also written in a way for anybody who's like super into birth, can understand it. And I took an 8-week course, and it was so awesome. And then I also really got into nutrition. I think maybe I've heard it on your show, but Real Food for Pregnancy by Lily Nichols. Mm-hmm. Awesome. So those were 2 resources that I felt like were a little bit different than other ones, but great for me.
All right. And then I know that you just want people to leave comments on the show notes page if they want to reach out, and I'll make sure that you see them.
Sure. Awesome.
All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing today. This is so great.
Thanks so much, Bryn. I feel very lucky to be able to share my story, and I'm so fortunate. It's been so great to hear all of the birth stories, so thank you for doing what you do.
You're welcome. Thanks again for coming on. Now I'm going to chat with Anissa about Expectful, today's sponsor. And don't forget, you can go to expectful.com/birthhour to get an extended free trial today. Hi, Anissa. Welcome to the Birth Hour. Thanks for coming on the podcast today to talk with me about Expectful.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be speaking with you today.
It's been so fun to hear different aspects of the Expectful app over the last few months in these conversations. But for those that are new to the podcast, can you just remind us a little bit about who you are and how you found Expectful?
Absolutely. So my name is Anissa Amat, and I serve as the head of community at Expectful. And Expectful is the meditation app and sleep app for fertility, pregnancy, and parenthood. Just for any new listeners. So I discovered Expectful during the second trimester of my pregnancy. It was actually a couple of weeks after my 20-week scan. My doctor had expressed concern that she didn't believe my placenta was delivering enough nutrients to my baby, and she was concerned about my baby's weight. She believed she was too small. So immediately after my appointment, I was seeing a high-risk specialist twice a week, in addition to my OBGYN every week. And I was getting ultrasounds every week. So they were monitoring my baby so closely. And she was growing, but not at the rate that they wanted her to. And I just remember after these appointments, I would just sit in my car and just cry, because I had convinced myself that there was something that I had done wrong. And I remember, so it was 2 weeks of that, of just being stressed and anxious. And I was scrolling through Instagram one evening, and one of my friends had mentioned Expectful. And I downloaded the app. And the first meditation that I listened to was Trusting Your Body. And I remember just crying and just reconnecting with my body and just reminding myself that, okay, just release this need to be in control and trust that this body that has been a home to you knows what it's doing. And it's going to get you through this pregnancy and get you to your baby. So that's how I discovered Expectful. And now I have the opportunity to write meditations for women across the world and to just give them a piece of what I received from Expectful when I was pregnant.
Yeah, it's so special. I love hearing that story. And we've been talking a lot about how to use Expectful during pregnancy over our last few interviews. And today we really want to focus about postpartum. And I love that so many businesses in the pregnancy and preparing for birth space are really starting to realize how important it is to continue supporting new mothers after the baby arrives. So let's talk a little bit about how you guys are doing that and what advice you would give to women who are navigating through the postpartum period.
So there are two pieces of advice that I would offer. The first would be to extend grace and patience to yourself during this time. Everything is so new and you're adjusting to new life and your body is doing a whole bunch of different things. You know what I mean? And the other piece of advice that I am so happy I took is to rest when your baby rests. Mm-hmm. The laundry and the dishes, all of those things will get done. But during these very delicate and fragile times, rest is so important. I remember after I had my daughter, we were closing on a house a month after she was born. And so there were boxes everywhere. There was packing that still needed to get done. And I told myself, I was like, it's going to get done. Right now I'm resting. When my baby's asleep, mama's going to be asleep. I gave that to myself and I'm so happy that I did.
Yeah, rest is everything. And I think sometimes it can be hard to fall asleep because you have so much on your mind. And one thing that helped me was reading that even just laying down and closing your eyes has a lot of restful qualities to it, even if you don't fall asleep. So maybe don't stress too much about the actual falling asleep part if you're struggling with that. But you guys are really there to help people who are struggling with that. Can you talk a little bit about the meditations that you offer for sleep specifically?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we have a beautiful sleep library for every stage of your journey. And we have it's so expansive. I'm like trying to figure out where to start. So first, we have our sleep meditations. Those come in 5, 10, 20-minute increments, and they just support you and guide you into sleep and easing you into rest. And then we have our sleep stories, which are these lovely stories that help you fall asleep. And those are for mama and baby and even your partner. So you all can listen to those together. Recently, we offer now a collection of lullabies, which are absolutely beautiful, again, to support mom and baby in getting sleep. And we also have a virtual sound machine. So we have heartbeat sounds, we have delta waves, we have nature sounds, which, again, are just helpful and supportive in getting rest and winding down. And yeah.
That is so cool. I didn't even know about the virtual sound machine. That's going to be my new go-to every time we're traveling. Even with my toddler, I still need it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so many great offerings to support with settling into sleep. And in addition to it being really challenging to find rest, what are some other challenges that you see postpartum that you're addressing with Expectful?
So another challenge that mamas can face in this postpartum period is nursing. It is another thing that is new and different, whether it's your first baby or your second. And it's just something else that you're getting used to and trying to figure out. So we have nursing meditations to support women who are experiencing cluster feeding or who are looking to hold on to a sense of relaxation during those night feedings. We also have offerings that support women who are pumping and bottle feeding their babies. And what I love most about these meditations is that women feel wrapped in support. And we are, again, touching on that key point of wanting our listeners to not feel like they're alone on this journey.
Yeah, I love that so much. And I think that, a lot of those feelings definitely come up postpartum, and you might be surrounded by friends and family, maybe not so much during a pandemic. So you're dealing with that as well. But oftentimes the focus shifts so much the moment the baby comes out of the belly, and it's all about the baby, and we're neglecting the needs of mom. So what are some other ways that you can find mindfulness support during the postpartum stage?
Gosh, I love our postpartum library so much. And it mainly because it supported me so much during postpartum. I had a cesarean birth after 20 hours of labor and 4 hours of pushing. And even before I went into labor, I had told myself that I wanted to adopt the tradition of staying in the house for 40 days with my baby and just getting used to her and allowing my body to rest and just go through all of these changes postpartum. So after a cesarean birth, I really honored that. So we have a beautiful 40-day postpartum library of meditations that support you in those first 40 days. And it allows you to reconnect with yourself and learn how to support yourself as you kind of navigate the physical and emotional changes that arise in the fourth trimester. We had the honor and opportunity of partnering with Kimberly Johnson to help us write those meditations. We also have postpartum depression meditations within our postpartum library. And that's a journey of meditations to support women who are going through postpartum depression. So yeah, our postpartum library is so beautiful and so supportive during, those first few months postpartum.
Yeah, it sounds like you guys really have covered everything. And I especially love that 40-day postpartum meditation library, because I think so many of us are like challenge focused or goal focused. Yeah. And so to be like, okay, I'm going to do this every day for 40 days is something to really focus on versus trying to remember to open the app and just choosing a meditation.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So where can people get started if they want to learn more about Expectful?
Yeah. So to try out the app, they can start a free trial at expectful.com or by simply downloading the Expectful app in the App Store.
Perfect. Well, we'll put those on the show notes so people can click right over. And thank you so much for coming on to chat with me today about this.
Oh, perfect. Thank you so much for having me. It was such a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you so much again to Camilla for sharing her birth stories with us today, and to Expectful for sponsoring this episode. If you want more information from today's episode, you can head over to thebirthhour.com and search for Camilla's name in the search bar. You can also leave a comment for her there if you want to get in touch. And if you want to try out the Expectful app, head over to expectful.com/birthhour to get that extra special, longer free trial today. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, head to thebirthhour.com and click Become a Member to pledge your support. And as a thank you, you'll get an invitation to join our private Facebook group and access to exclusive episodes. Your vote of confidence and support means the world to me.